Hello, my name is AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and today I wanted to bring you a video not based on any game, just basically one. I actually had an idea. Well, I've had this idea before, but I also recently got an email from a fan, and he basically said he had some ideas for various videos that I could do on openings. But what he asked me to do was, an idea. I've had this request before to do a video on, an opening repertoire. In other words, just quickly put something together. And he had a lot of ideas of his own, but he said, I wanted you to come up with one, and let's see a video on just a simple opening repertoire. And I thought a lot about this, and there's dozens of different ideas I had based on different types of repertoires you could put together. And based on my teaching experience, I decided eventually that the repertoire that I wanted to tackle first was to do a repertoire on the Ruy Lopez, basically without the theory. And basically, the Ruy Lopez comes up after, just starting backwards here, e4, e5. Okay, and now knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5 is the Ruy Lopez. But if you want to learn the Ruy Lopez, just quickly go through those moves. E4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now the standard Ruy Lopez is bishop to b5, and now you have a6, bishop a4, etc. But the problem with the Ruy Lopez is that if you try to learn the Ruy Lopez, and this is based on my experience as a chess teacher, is that many times you have to run into so many different opening variations that you have to learn. One thing you have to learn how to play is the open variation. Quite a number of players that I used to play a number of years ago played the open quite a bit. Nowadays, the only person I know of that off the top of my head that I can think of that plays the open pretty regularly is Doug Strout from Montgomery, Alabama. He has played the open variation against me, and I have a web page on that, so you should be able to find that with Google pretty easily. And I think also I have a YouTube video on that game. But anyway, you can, if you play the regular Ruy Lopez, you have to know the open, you have to know the close, you have to know the Marshall Gambit, the Berlin defense. The number of variations you will have to face and learn trying to learn the Ruy Lopez are just it's quite daunting task. It's literally overwhelming. The amount of theory that you have to absorb just to be able to play the Ruy Lopez sufficiently well in a tournament, a fairly strong tournament, is quite daunting. And it takes a long time and I've been teaching chess for a long time, and a lot of players come to me and they say, well, I want to learn the Ruy Lopez. And eventually I'll ask them about different variations. I said, well, have you ever seen this variation before? And blow their mind, and then show them another. Well, have you ever played against this line? No, I've never seen that one before. And this goes on and on and on. And generally, the average player, the beginner player, or the say player 1600 and below, when they're first starting out, it's just too difficult to try to learn that much theory that quickly. And so what I wanted to do is basically, again, in a nutshell, show you how to learn the Ruy Lopez without all the theory. And without any further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. Also, I think that the games that you study the Ruy Lopez, see master players playing the Ruy Lopez, is to get a feel for those kinds of positions, is the games of Bobby Fischer, the games of Magnus Carlsen, and also I advise looking at the games of Yefim Geller and maybe Gary Kasparov as well. So those are a few players that play the Ruy Lopez as white, played it very, very strongly, and even, believe it or not, Anatoly Karpov at one time used to play the Ruy Lopez. He used to be a king pawn player, and now I think before he quit playing chess, he's more or less semi-retired now, but before he stopped playing chess actively at the highest levels, he'd switched completely over to queen pawn, but at one time he was a strong king pawn player as well. But anyway, without any further ado, we're just going to jump right into this. E4, E5. Okay, these are your opening variations. This is how the Ruy Lopez start. Now, basically, what I'm going to try to teach you is just to put your pieces on all their best squares. In other words, knight f3, bishop c4, c3, and just basically you're going to try to play a Ruy Lopez but without the theory. In other words, your pieces will eventually wind up on the squares. A lot of times your light squared bishop winds up here on b3, a2, or c2 because you're going to push your c pawn. The white knight comes to f3 and you castle. In other words, the idea is to try to reach a Ruy Lopez type of position, even without, without having to learn all the theory, all the various variations and systems, that there's just so many of them, it's too much to learn. So anyway, let's look at c5. Now, what about c5? Believe it or not, you can still play this same idea, the Ruy Lopez without the theory, against c5. And it's, again, I can't cover every single variation because that would take forever, but just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, we're going to go ahead and just look at one sample line, c5, knight f3, knight c6, c3. Okay, knight f6, bishop to d3, kind of like a Kopek system, which is a part of this. d6, h3, white's just playing moves, e5, bishop c2, bishop e7, white castles, black castles, rook e1, bishop e6, a3, queen c7, and now what I like to do is just play d3 here. You can also go ahead and play d4, but d3 is just a nice move. And now you play moves like, knight bd2, knight f1, get your knight out and get it over to the center. A lot of times what I like to do when I'm playing blitz chess is just get all my pieces developed. Play knight bd2, knight f1, knight g3, queen e2, bishop to d2 or e3, put the queen rook on queen 1, put the bishop back on c1, and then and maybe even put the bishop on b1, and once I've eliminated any targets or any possible hangers, then I go ahead and play d4. And that's just a simple, safe way to develop all your pieces, again, without having to learn all the theory of various openings. And again, if you know anything about the Ruy Lopez, you'll notice white's pawn structure and the bishop on c2. This is the same type of thing that white does usually on the white side of Ruy Lopez, except maybe the pawns on d4. So again, we're trying to learn the Ruy Lopez without the theory. Going back to the king pawn, we just briefly covered the Sicilian, e4, e5, now knight f3, knight c6, and now white plays bishop c4. Most of your stronger players, and this is what I found in the engines, will play knight f6. That seems to be universal, which is, with knight g5 you get into two knights defense, and there you have to memorize a lot of variations and know a ton of theory. And of course the whole idea of this video is not having to know theory, in other words, to learn the system quickly and easily. Now let's say your opponent plays, instead of after bishop c4, they don't play knight f6. What if they play bishop c5? We're going to very quickly look at two lines. I would advise you to have at least one sharp line. In other words, try to learn one sharp line, and one very sharp line is playing the Evans Gambit, b4. And again, I can't cover all the variations, and if you really want to learn the Evans Gambit, I would advise buying a book and or a DVD on this opening and learn it as best you can. But I think that's what you really need to do, is try to learn this opening as best you possibly can. But b4, bishop takes b4, c3, bishop a5, d4, e takes d4, white castles. Most players will play d6 because they're worried about, things. Some players will snatch the extra pawn, but that usually gets black in trouble. Queen b3, queen e7, c takes d4, and now I'm going to show you a trap. This is what a lot of my opponents have done in tournaments. I've actually had, I imagine between 5 and 10 or maybe even more opponents in tournaments over the years fall into this trap. Is after c takes d4, a lot of players will play knight f6 because they're trying to attack this king pawn, and it looks like they're developing. And now white has a very good move. Now you don't want to play d5 here. A lot of players play d5, but then the black knight goes to e5. It's hitting your knight, threatening to double your pawns, and also hitting your bishop. The idea of d5 is trying to get this knight to move. Like if the knight just goes back to d8, then queen a4 check or queen b5 check and win a free bishop here. But then if the knight goes to e5, and now if you exchange the knight, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, bishop b2, queen takes e4, and the engine says that black's already better here. And you can't win this bishop on a5, queen b5 check, and queen takes a5 because simply queen takes e4. And you're not ready with this bishop guarding the e1 square. It looks kind of scary to have the queen on e4 but this bishop on a5 guarding the e1 square. You're not ready to play rook e1 anytime soon. So that's just too hard to do. And anyway, so that's just an idea. If he plays knight c3, you can just probably put the queen on h4. Again, if queen b5 check, bishop d7, queen takes a5, queen takes c4. So it's really hard for white to win that pawn that way. But going back to our move here of knight f6, that's actually a mistake, because the move there is e5 exclam. And again, I've checked this with the engines. Houdini 4 and Deep Fritz 14 agree that's winning. And now what most players do is they play d takes e5. Now you play d5 exclam. And we'll go ahead and give that move an exclam. That's a good move there. Just give that move an exclam. And anyway, now most players play knight d4. Knight takes d4, e takes d4. Queen a4 check, c6, queen takes a5, and black's completely busted, and all the engines confirm that. And again, that's a trap. I don't know if that's in any trap book, but that's a trap that I've caught in quite a number of players in tournaments over the years. And so it's worthwhile knowing that if you're going to play the Evans Gambit. But that just gives you an idea there that if you want to try to adopt the Evans Gambit and make that part of your repertoire, you have a sharp line. Now let's say you don't want to learn the sharp line right away. You can also go with the idea of playing, again, a Ruy Lopez or a Ruy Lopez type of setup without the theory. And again, just c3, knight f6, queen e2, d6, h3. Again, you want to prevent that pin there. Black usually castles here, d3, a6, a3, that's just to give the bishop lots of running squares, a2 and b3. b5, bishop b3, bishop to d7, castles, queen e7, rook e1, rab8, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. And, you know, again, the idea is to play knight bd2, knight f1, those kind of things, get your rooks in the center, and eventually you're going to explode and play d4. But this is a nice little position for white. It's playable, and this is, again, a setup I've used in tournaments before. But, you know, it's just an idea there. Again, the idea is to play a Ruy Lopez kind of setup and not have to learn, you know, the theory of, you know, many different opening lines. That's the whole goal of this video, is to basically learn how to play a Ruy Lopez type of setup, but without the theory. Okay, so anyway, going back to our initial idea there, e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c6, bishop c4. Most of your stronger players will play knight f6, and you can check this with any engine. I mean, any engine will show you that's the sharpest move there, and that's what most stronger players will play, and it's also what a lot of the engines play here in this position. And a lot of my opponents in tournaments will play that move. So anyway, if you want to play Ruy Lopez without the theory, you just proceed with d3, bishop e7, castles, castles, c3, d6, bishop b3, knight a5, bishop c2. Again, this is very similar to the Chigorin defense. The reason I show this line is this is what I've had 2200 level players play this line against me when I play this way in tournaments. c5, rook e1, queen c7, knight bd2, rook e8, knight f1, a6, h3, b5, and now you can play knight e3, or even the knight can go to g3. But again, the idea there is just, you know, the knight can go to either g3 or e3. I usually like to go to e3, and maybe you can play knight g4, but also g3 is perfectly playable. Again, the idea is, you know, queen e2, get your rooks to the center, drop the bishops back, and then play d4. And one of the ideas, I want to talk a little bit about that position. Let's just quickly run through that. Let's say after knight g3 that, you know, your opponent plays something like bishop b7, queen e2, you know, he plays, they usually play their knight back there. You play, you know, bishop to d2, they play rook c8, rad1. So a lot of times they play h6 because they don't really know what to do there. Just bishop c1. And now, again, the idea is to play d4, and if they allow you, you play d5. And then a lot of times what I like to do is shift my entire attack over to the king side. In other words, play rook f1, knight h2, knight g4, f4, and just go all out on the king side. And I've done that in tournament practice with a fair measure of success. But the whole idea there is just basically to play the Ruy Lopez again without, you know, having to learn all the theory. I'm just saving that file there. So if anybody wants that file, if you email me that at LifeMasterAJ@yahoo.com, I'll email you the little line here if you wanted to just learn the chess-based line. It's just some quick analysis I put together, and not a lot of commentary. Just, you know, again, the idea is to play a Ruy Lopez without the theory. And anyway, that concludes my video. Thank you for watching my video. If you like my videos, and hopefully this will give you an idea. If you know, and if you like the video, write in. Maybe I have many ideas for, you know, some simple opening lines, things you can learn, things that are openings that are simple and easy to learn, and you can learn them very quickly. And I'm going to try to do a couple more of these videos in the next coming weeks. But anyway, thank you for watching my video. If you'd like my video and would like to make a contribution to support my efforts, go to the PayPal website. That's www.paypal.com, and make a donation under my email address, which is lifemasteraj@yahoo.com. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.